Here with us, we have Christian Paulwitz. Thank you, Christian, for joining us for this session.
Really happy to be able to talk to you this day about EMC testing and preparation for it. Let's start with some structure. I want to give my presentation here. First, I want to give some introduction, and then I think we have to distinguish two main parts, testing for pre-compliance and final testing of your equipment, of your product. And the approach to go to a laboratory for either part might be a little bit different. So it's worth to have a look on that separately. Well, introduction, electromagnetic compatibility, that's quite a large field. Let's start with the definition. I took it from the wording of the EMC directive, but it's not about regulation. You find quite the same wording in the international vocabulary of electrotechnical words. Electromagnetic compatibility means the ability of equipment to function satisfactorily in its electromagnetic environment without introducing intolerable electromagnetic disturbances to other equipment in that environment. And what does that mean? We have two issues. One is the emission issue. Our equipment should not cause too much emission, not to disturb other equipment, especially radio services, for example. And on the other side, it should be able to withstand the electromagnetic environment in the way it can be expected, and that's the immunity aspect. We have two aspects, emission and immunity. Most times we fight first with the emission aspect and then with the immunity aspect. That's the normal way. And then when it comes to physics and we have a look on electromagnetic phenomena, we see at first that they may propagate from an emission source to drain either in a conducted way, propagate by lines, and propagate via the air by fields, electric fields, magnetic fields, electromagnetic fields. And we have, on the one side, we have the phenomena in the reality where we can where we can see both ways of propagation. And we have the setup for testing. And when we have the look on the same phenomenon, it might not be always the same way of testing and real physics propagation. In conducted or radiated way. For example, our typical conducted emission limits are based on a model to protect radio services below 30 megahertz, for example. So in reality, in the typical real case, might be a radio functional case, but we test it via conducted emission because it's easier to test and we can do better tests with better reproducibility. So that might be sometimes a bit different. When you develop a product and have to care about electromagnetic compatibility of your product, you will come to the issue that you have a lot of freedom, levels of freedom in the design phase, where you can change your product a little bit to improve it for electromagnetic compatibility, putting in maybe some filtering, having some space for it, and so on. When you need to do any changes because you come across problems in EMC testing, then during the project time, it gets more and more costly to do any changes again. So it's really worth to care for EMC from the beginning, because in the beginning it's easiest to change your maybe your layout so you have better EMC performance, or putting in some little component or some shield measure or whatever. And the later you are in your product development phase, maybe even coming to production phase, then the later you come across EMC problems, the more difficult and more costly it will become to do any changes. And please remember the typical relationship between your EMC work in of development phase and qualification phase will be something like 80% to 20%. So the qualification part will take not so much time when you have done your development according to EMC properly. And to ensure that, you have to do something in the development phase, and then final testing will not be so hard, at least. And then I would like to remind you at some project management rule, which is valid for any project, independent of EMC at all. You might have the feeling as a human that you have to go a certain way from the beginning over the time to the end 100%, where you want to fulfill your target and reach your target. And as a human, you might think in a linear way, so you have to go your way step by step. And when you have passed 50% of the way, you should have passed it in half of the time. And for a project you manage, if you go like that, you will fail nearly for sure. The typical project fulfillment way is like that, roughly to have 80% reached of your target at 50% of your time. So you need to do really a lot in the beginning, also ensuring EMC in an EMC project and a development project. If you do not have 50% of your, after 50% of your time, more or less your EMC work, and you are sure about how the concept is and how it works, and you're sure that it works, then it will really be hard to reach your target. And of course, maybe you may be after 50% of your time, not exactly at 80%, but rather at 70% or so. And then, of course, you can do harder, try harder, and then still reach your target. But if you are not aware of that misshape that you need to fulfill where you should be after 50% your time, it's really improbable that you can reach your target. But that's valid for any project, not only EMC. So let's come to how to prepare for EMC testing in the pre-compliance phase, in the development phase, where your product is not yet finished. You have a lot of degrees of freedom, and you want to prepare your success concerning the EMC requirements. So you should have first, really in the beginning of your project, which EMC requirements do apply for your product at all. It often happens and people are not so exactly aware about it in the beginning. You should think about when you want to do your first check, are you on the right track? When does it make sense to do that? And then you need a prototype. You should think about EOT setup and operating conditions, which make sense. And my recommendation is first to focus on emission, first conducted, then radiated emission, and then after that checking the immunity part. So how to ensure EMC by your hardware design? You should have some concept. One